Okay, today is October 6th, 2017, and we are on for a webinar for Weekend Dialogue with the Author. And the topic today is about a book called The Inheritors, Moving Forward from Generational Trauma. Gita Baack, our author. And thank you, Gita, for being online all week with the folks that were able to join you online for conversation. And I think it was a rich and lively conversation with a few people. So thank you for doing that. And Gita's going to be talking with us in a minute about her book and taking questions and stories and comments. This is sponsored, this Week in Dialogue with the Author series is sponsored by the Taos Institute. The Taos Institute is a nonprofit organization, educational 501c3, and we look at how we create the world we want to live in through the theory of social construction, through the lens of social construction, which is looking at our social practices, our relational practices, and working in collaborative and dialogic ways to create the world, and look at how look at the space in our relationships. So I think Gita's got some good things going on with her book to talk about the trauma and inheritance of that. So start, can we have each person say their name and where they are in the world? And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to click on your microphone to get on mute. And we'll just kind of go around, and anybody can start. Just say your name and where you are in the world, and then I just want to make sure everybody's microphone is working.
Okay, hi, Dennis Baird. I'm in Audubon Park, that's east of Montreal, Quebec.
Great, thank you, Dennis.
I'm Pamela Schreiner, and I'm in Ottawa, in Canada.
Great, thank you, Pamela.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from Belgium, but I'm currently in Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, good. So it's late at night for you. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
Who else?
My name is Nicola, and I'm in Toronto.
Okay, good. Thanks.
My name is June, and I'm in Ottawa.
Okay.
I'm Barbara Ward, and I'm from Kitchener, Ontario, Canada.
Great.
Hi, I'm Joanne Manta, and I'm from Gatineau, Quebec.
Okay, great. Lots of Canadians on this call. Thank you for joining us. I think we're all Canadian except for Sarah, who's Belgian. Oh, and here's Mary. One more. Mary, can you say where you are in the world and your name?
Hi, I'm Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Mary Johnell. I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina, the deep south. No.
Yeah.
and
Great.
I'm happy to be here. I've enjoyed the book very much.
Great, thank you. And Mary, if you get your video going. Wonderful. I think we're ready to start, Gita, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. So I don't know how many, has everybody read the book or parts of it? So I don't have to go into a long description of what it is at the moment. I think what I'll just say is that having read the book, have you identified yourself as an inheritor? Anybody not identified themselves as an inheritor? That's what I expected. We pretty well are all inheritors of trauma of some kind or another. In our pre-conversation, Dennis Baird was saying that at the global level, we have inheritors who have suffered huge catastrophes, but at the individual and family level, who hasn't known some kind of devastating event from a divorce to a suicide to cancer suddenly coming up to mental illness or abuse. Life is life. And of course, recently we're all kind of traumatized by the Las Vegas shooting, and the people who have been involved in that are going to be faced with a lifetime of dealing with that. I noticed that the reporters are talking about healing already. It's crazy. It has just happened. And one of my bugs in the world is when they talk about healing trauma. And all the books out there about trauma talk about healing. I don't like the word healing. In social construction terms, it's our societal construct. It's a pathological construct. We're actually not broken. What happened to us happened to us. It isn't something that we are suffering from. It is a terrible thing that has happened to us. And what we need to do is get at it and process it and live a life that's not full of the burdens and the sadness and the pain all the time. So more of a transformational, or Dennis used the word reclamation. I like that. Or no, Moira used that term, reclamation, sort of reclaiming your life. I love that. So I'm talking about moving forward, and that's the title of my book. Also, the other main point that I want to make is that we also talk about our resilience. We're high functioning people. It's not like we're lying in bed unable to move. And not only that, not only high functioning, but we tend to be a rather compassionate bunch of people. And many of us are in the helping professions, like everybody in this space. So that kind of sums up where I come from. Any responses to that? So I did create a PowerPoint because I wanted to leave it with you for after. There's no way I'm going to go through it all, but should I just go screen share here, Dawn? So I just summarized the points of the, whoops, it's not coming on. Oh, here it is. There we go. So I just wanted to summarize the, how do I get it to move? Oh, here. Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to summarize what people said. Some people talked about the impact on ourselves. Once we understand that we too are inheritors of trauma and have dealt with it a bit, we can be more open with people. We don't need to hide what we're saying. I found when I got together with people who are inheritors, we actually had a pretty good time because it was so much fun to share our craziness that we had in our brains going on and thinking that we were alone doing this, and then discovering, no, we're not crazy at all. There's other people who do exactly the same thing. So when you understand yourself at your core, you can crack open that hard shell that you might have built around yourself to survive. One important thing for us as relational leaders is to create a safe space where people can share and open up. So the other thing about the safe space is that much of what we have inherited, because if it's not a direct inheritance, if you're not if you're not suffering from, for example, being a military, in the military and coming back with PTSD, then your memories are current and your flashbacks and your dreams are current. If you are the child of that veteran, it's a different story. You have inherited your parents' feelings, and as a sensitive child, you will be very, very perceptive about all of the small things they may or may not do. And you will be feeling things that you may not know where they come from. You might have dreams that you don't know where they come from. I call that knowing the unknown. The other issue is that in the families, many of them don't talk about what has happened. Certainly the vets don't talk, and they, will drown themselves out in various addictions. Perhaps our indigenous people are certainly drowning themselves with the high suicide rates today. And it's just really, really very, very sad. So I really believe that if it isn't processed, we will continue to perpetuate that trauma from generation to generation. And so the processing is so important. And the talking about it is important, because those secrets make you sick. As I believe Freud had once summarized, secrets make you sick. There are many undiscussables in the family. I was watching that Knowing Your Roots show the other day, and and it's quite common. People are floored when they find out their family backgrounds. They had no idea. Nobody ever talked about it. And when I talk to people worldwide, although my lens is that of a child of Holocaust survivors, every person I talk to would practically right at the front end say to me, my mother talked, my father didn't, my father talked, my mother didn't. They talked all the time, or they never talked. They were just clammed up shut. And Mary's nodding her head. Sounds familiar? Can we unmute Mary? Can we unmute? We
Yeah,
can't.
is that better? Is that better?
Yeah.
I am absolutely floored by this book, and I regret that I was not able to participate online during the week, but absolutely touched to the core, as you say, with the eye-opening thoughts that you shared with us. It's beautifully written, and really, I think a very important work that you've done.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it started as my TAUS dissertation, and I knew that I wanted to get it out into the public, so I took out as much academia as I could, although some of the theories certainly are there. And TAUS was, my advisor, John Reisman, was lovely enough to tell me to write generatively. So unlike most dissertation programs, I got to write in a personal way. So it began in a personal way. My poetry was in there. I should talk about the poetry. The reason for the poetry, as we're talking about those secrets and the undiscussables, there's various ways of getting at those stories that we don't know, or those feelings that somehow we don't know where they're coming from. Even the games that we play in our head, even as children, like when I was a kid, and then I found out in one of my dialogues, somebody else who did the same thing, I would look around at people, my friends or adults and my parents' friends, and I'd say, that person would survive. No, that person would never survive. Would I survive? And then I'd go down the path of, what if I was being tortured and I had to reveal where my parents were hidden? Would I do it? And then I'd end up crying because I was a chicken, and there's no way I would, I'd give up my parents, and then I'd feel guilty, and these crazy thoughts that, a child's fantasy world can get into. So poetry, meditation, as Joanne Manta is interested in, meditation, poetry, EMDR, which is this eye movement deprogramming, and that some psychiatrists do. Psychiatrists are now saying that talk therapy doesn't help. And it doesn't help for this kind of trauma. It also doesn't help for repetitive trauma, like repetitive sexual abuse. And so they're actually at a loss as to what does help. But I think I have the answer. I think it is in processing the story, and it is in dialogue to help us process that story, and creating the safe spaces, relational leaders. When we run those dialogues is kind of what we're here to talk about. So I don't know if you noticed, but when you went on Amazon, I did publish a poetry book as well. It's called Poems of Angst and Awe, with a big yes on the cover. The poems that are in the book are also in this book. And this book has some poems that, when I go to a TAUS conference or workshop, I always write a poem based on the notes. Instead of writing notes, I write a poem about what people are saying. They're very poetic, our speakers. And I've got some really nice poems I've attributed to either Ken Gergen, Samuel Mahaffey, Stephen Holland Wemp, different people that have spoken. So the creative arts, song, dance can tap into it. So one of the people I talked to who works with military brats, children of the military, she does a kind of art therapy, and we spent a long time drawing out what it is she does because she couldn't focus on it. And what she does is she repeats, she'll have them draw something and then they'll repeat a movement. She found that by repeating the small kind of an image, it stops the busy brain, the hyperdrive that we can get into. And it's a way to appease us. We can get quite anxious and not know where it comes from. And that again goes for everybody. Any comments so far?
I'm not. I'm on mic. Okay, Dennis here. And I am surprised that psychiatrists would say that talking therapy doesn't work, first of all, because that is how people open up. But not everybody, of course, it doesn't work for everybody, I accept. EMDR, very powerful. My wife is a specialist in this, and she's had some fantastic results. And I think the whole idea here is the word that you use, which is a dialogue, that you have an individual who is carrying something and they may not even be aware, but until they discuss it, until they actually mention it, until they can touch it, if you will, they're not able to address it. And I guess that's the only point that I make. I'm really surprised that some psychiatrists would say that, but on the other hand, knowing some psychiatrists, I'm not too surprised.
Anybody else?
Joanne, hi Gita. Thank you very much for making this book available to humanity in some ways. It's beautiful. What I was able to understand from conversations about your book with several people and conversations with friends, I have a feeling that dialogue, just the way we describe it usually, is probably not a sufficient definition of the type of dialogue that would be very efficient. And in my experience, I believe that it's a type of dialogue that accesses the right brain. If I, just to explain, because very often in a conversation, we stay with the left brain and the continuous wording, and it's logical, and but when you access the right brain, all of a sudden you access information that is more from imagery, that is more from another source. And I've experimented with that, and I've found that when we are attentive to that, it's more the world, the realm of the subtle, and to be able to raise consciousness to how the subtle world is providing information that can be helpful I'm not sure the healing, but at least the consciousness and awareness that there is something there. And I'm always confident in some ways that our capacity for homeostasis is prevalent in everything, in every part of our being, and that just by raising the consciousness and awareness is the very first step. And very often, when it comes through the right brain awareness, it comes through the emotion, the connection with what it means. What is the purpose of that event? How does it fit in my purpose in this world? So that was my comment.
Yeah, and certainly the creative arts get at the
yes
part of the brain. So,
yes.
how is it that you get at?
Well, as a life coach, I studied with an organization called International Leadership Coaching Institute, and they developed a tool called the Brainwalk as one tool. I use many tools to access that right brain. That is one of them. But I also use Otto Scharmer's Theory U. I've integrated it in my coaching, and I've found that since I've integrated it in my coaching, all of a sudden, even though the coaching is not, people don't come to a coach for a trauma directly. They, in a sense, that they come for well-being. They come because they have specific objectives. But all of a sudden, a coaching is a purpose. The purpose of the coach, in a sense, is to permit a step back and to widen the scope of how you see a situation. And all of a sudden, as the person is trusting and is trusting their own right brain through the Theory U, where you get into a presencing moment and emergence, and that trust is evident or is present. It's amazing what can come out. And of course, there's no pressure. And very often there's no even awareness that there was a problem, or that all of a sudden this image pops up and there's no understanding of it, and we start decoding it.
Yeah.
And so I have found that for me, yeah.
Right, and you use the word presencing, which is very important for a relational leader, anybody working with people in conflict.
And that's where I use a little bit of meditation to get into the presencing state, if I may say. And it's all mild, it's very subtle. There's no direct, how should I say, in coaching, you always skirt around the edges. You always go, well, that's my style anyway, go into the peripherals. From the edge to go forward to what is really key. And I've found that is less, how should I say it, to go directly is almost offensive in some ways, I found. The situation is so tender sometimes that to go around it, and so a direct dialogue might be good at first.
Yeah, the beauty of the dialogue, I believe that magic happens in dialogues.
Yes. In true dialogue.
And yeah, as a lifelong facilitator and working in groups and organizations and with individuals, what I like about the dialogue is, number one, if you create the correct, the nice safe space, people are validated by other people.
Yeah.
One of the most important needs of human beings is acknowledgement and validation. I was reading once when I was a high school teacher about an expression the little black kids in the ghetto would say to each other if they got mad at each other. They'd say, "Forget you," like rub you out, and that's just the worst thing, to be kicked out, to be excluded. And what you will notice at the political level, Armenians are still waiting for validation about the Armenian genocide. Canada has just acknowledged it. Turkey hasn't. Everybody needs that validation. We build memorials and monuments, and we commemorate. We have Veterans Days. That validation and acknowledgement by an other is absolutely critical. So perhaps, Dennis, sitting in the psychiatrist's office, it's wonderful to get that acknowledgement from the psychiatrist, but it's really, really very nice to get it from a group of people that are like you at the same level. I've got this quote here: "Nothing is as it seems." We just don't know what we don't know, even when we're dealing, with a patient that we've known for years or a friend that we've known for years.
I'd like to just say one thing about that. I think it occurs to me that the position of a life coach and the position of a psychiatrist, and I've worked always with the medical model because I've trained as a nurse and nurse practitioner. the medical model or the psychiatrist has a formula or a cookbook recipe to follow regardless of the condition of the person in front of them. And I think the life coach, as you say, opens a safe space for people to talk. And maybe talk therapy doesn't work looking at it from the measurable post-positivist, if that's what it's called, view, where it does work when somebody feels safe enough to say, you know, I understand that you get me and that you're listening and paying attention. So I agree with Joanne, and I guess I just wanted to say perhaps that's why it's said that it doesn't work, because it's being measured by a different standard than what we understand is happening. Or sense that is happening, and see somebody walk out the door able to not be addicted to drugs, or not be at least aware that that's what they've been doing. And how do you measure that? Or, you know, so it works. So that's all.
So this slide shows some of the rules of engagement, and don't like that term that much, that as a relational leader, we need to build in order to have that space where people can get at what they need to get at. And of course, we don't know, because it needs to be individual. My book is called a self-help book, and I hate it, but the categories, we have no choice. The self-help books all have a 1, 2, 3 step process and you'll be healed. Whereas we know, everybody here in this group knows that it has to be internal, it has to come from inside, and it can't be prescriptive. We don't know what people need. So all we can do really is create a safe space. And, you know, I certainly have had some wonderful psychiatrists who have done that. One of the things that you don't have with the psychiatrist, and many people don't do this, the very first rule is all voices are equal, including you as the leader in the group. I don't like the idea of creating any kind of authority figure. And inheritors of these global traumas, the displaced refugees, petrified of authority figures. I saw a video of Rwandans who, Sierra Leone, I think, who had recently been butchered, and they were in trauma therapy, and there was these people who were saying, they took us into a room by ourselves. We were all alone. Nobody else was with us, and there was no drumming and there was no singing. And they asked us these questions. That's just horrific. So we need each other. We need the people that we're comfortable with, other voices that are similar to ours. And the leader, the role I play is I'm a participant. I'm trying to co-host dialogues. When I do a dialogue, I don't go into a community of South Sudanese or indigenous as a white woman coming in. I always co-host with somebody from that group, and I give them a little bit of pointers. And it's not rocket science what I'm saying. Anybody can run a group, really, as long as we've got some of these boundaries, these foundations set. So I'm an equal participant, but I do hold back. I don't set the agenda. I don't ask a lot of questions. Margaret Wheatley said you can't push, but you can nudge. So I might do a little nudge here and there. Also, we can't have a timeline. Right now in Canada, we've got a Murdered and Missing Women Commission, and they gave them limited resources and limited time, and it hasn't been working, and now they're asking for, you cannot put a timeline on processing trauma. So as people are telling their stories, they're telling them for validation. You can't push that, and neither can you push the transformation process. So however long it takes, that's how long it'll take. When I do participate, I tell my story and I speak in the I. I really am participating, just like everybody else, telling my story of inheritor. I don't participate as a leader. So of course, be present, don't make judgments or assumptions, and don't give advice. I think advice is some kind of a need that we have, and certainly us mothers have them. They're just addicted to giving people advice. But of course, most of us in this room here know that you have to let the process unfold. I trust the group so much that I don't ask the clarifying questions. This could surprise some people. I don't ask any questions at all. I let the group do it. You really have to breathe and hold back. But I have found transformations happen in groups where I didn't say a thing. It was entirely the group that would say, well, what did you mean by that? And what happened? And have you considered that? You know, it was like seasoned facilitators, and they would feed back. And the credibility as somebody who's been through there in this, you know, just like you, coming back with this feedback, I think it really has a lot of profound effects. So, so in other words, trust the process, trust the group, trust yourself. This is my mantra. I say this all the time to myself, to everybody who wants to hear. And so let's talk about how you as a relational leader can work as, you know, any other ideas working within groups. And also we are searching for community so badly. How can we here perhaps start a movement on community reclamation, reclaiming the communities that we have lost? I'm going to pass it over to everybody.
Just a small thing. The word leader implies an authority of some sort. And I think that's why we try, in the past, we've gone to words like facilitator, enabler, etc. But because I think that you do have an authority, even silent. So yeah, you're right. You really have to bite the tongue and trust the process, as you say, just to let it go. But it's you will still be seen as a coordinator of some sort. I think this has been my experience.
Yeah, and that's
this is why it's so hard.
Host can help too. Having that person in the room who isn't normally seen as a facilitator or a leader. Good point. But I think that's probably not the right word.
Yeah. So Gita, you said relational host, possibly.
Okay. Relational host. Very good. Yeah.
We almost got sexist there. I was going to thinking, well, hostess, but no, no, host. Great, sounds good.
Host is nice. Yeah. You know, one of my poems about this is really cute. I have to find it. You know, what we are doing is hosting, and having food and coffee and tea is really important. Here's one. It's called Performing Coffee. Let us open doors by performing coffee in different cultures. What will these doors open into? So curious to find out. And there's a very similar one. If I can find it quickly. About a round table. You know, that circle is such an important requirement that we be in a circle. Well, somebody think of something to talk about while I'm looking for this.
I think that in Holland, in the political system, I've read, I don't know if it's true, but there's something called circles for when they're trying to rebuild policy or create policy for different conditions. Circles come in and talk, and then I think there's never more than 8 people in a group, but there are several groups going on, and then those ideas are shared. I love the idea of hosting by bringing in people who maybe are served by offering some snacks or offering some foods and drinks that are not alcohol, but if you want coffee or tea and that sort of thing. I think it's so important to make them feel at home, to make people feel at home, and to make me feel at home as well if I'm the one being the host.
Right. Isn't that
Yes.
concept of breaking bread together?
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Communion is, it's communion, which I think,
Yeah.
it's very nice.
I found it. It's called Peace Doesn't Cost Anything. Peace doesn't cost anything. It just needs good humor and a round table. I could have memorized that.
There's an organization called the United Religions Initiative, and what their focus is that the conflict, many of the conflicts around the world are stemmed from a religious struggle. And what they've done is put together peace circles in many different countries. I think they've got over 600 peace circles, and each peace circle has to have a nice mixture of the cross section of the representation in that community. And they get together and talk about what's happening in the community and what they can do to focus on peace. And it's an exciting practice that they're doing, but it's called peace circles that they have. And I don't know if you want to look it up, it's called United Religions Initiative. And also, Moira, do you want to come on? She's got a question here about community.
Yeah.
Moira, you just would need to unmute yourself.
Before Moira comes on, I need to leave right now. Unfortunately, this conversation is really interesting. I wish I could have stayed longer, but I did mention it to you, Gita, earlier. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
I'm hoping there's not too much background noise here. But, oh, yeah.
Is that Moira? Moira, just 1 second before you continue. Joanne, is that you saying you have to leave?
Yes, that's right. So you
okay, I would like, before you leave, just so everybody knows, feel free to come back to the website that people were chatting on all week. And if you didn't join in the chat online, we can continue that. I'm sure Gita would be happy to come back to that webpage and continue the conversation. So Joanne, feel free to visit that page.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. And Dawn, I did send you some questions. So maybe to post that.
Okay, I can post those.
Yep. Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, Gita.
Thank you, Joanne.
It was wonderful. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye. And Moira, you want to ask your question or your comment?
Well, I'm just, when we talk about community groups, and I'm glad that Gita was talking about the peace groups, or Dawn, you were. But I think often as inheritors, what we've inherited is from cultures that have broken apart. I don't think that the culture that my ancestors brought from England to Canada really exists anymore. So what's my new community? What community do I bring together to talk about how our lives are as inheritors and how we want to move forward? What's the tagline that I'm going to put out, for example, to say, come and talk about this? I think there's a very direct link between what inheritors of the British experience. Okay, I have to reorganize my thought here. I think as a descendant of the British, who are very often at the core of what has happened in North America to Indigenous people and to Black people and so on, I think that's a group that needs to talk about how we feel about, you know, our ancestors having done these things. And we've been raised in the same kind of culture that allowed these things to happen, or made them happen. So how do you put together a group like that? I'm not sure.
There have been dialogues, quite a few, between German inheritors of Nazi and Israeli, and these are younger people. Children, grandchildren, even great grandchildren, because these are perpetuating issues. And of course, what the children of the Nazis, the perpetrators, and when I talk about that in my book too, that we're talking about everybody at the table, on all sides of the table. So there's certainly the victims, but there's also the inheritors of perpetrators and collaborators and bystanders. And when I go to Europe, it's very different than in Canada. When I go to Europe and I talk to people about the Holocaust, I see guilt that I don't see here in Canada, visibly shaking, still strongly feeling, how did we do this? You know, in the Netherlands, where I've gone thanks to the connections with Taos, I will hear people say this should never have happened. We sent all those people to their deaths. So those are those aren't even collaborators or perpetrators. Those are bystanders who are feeling guilty. People who felt helpless, didn't know how to help. So they're carrying that as well. And so we're talking about inheritors on all sides of the table. It's a very good point, is those dialogues. So do you need, you know, are we talking about dialogues with Indigenous people and colonial inheritors? It's a really good question and a good point. And I think we need to be courageous and have the dialogues between the two groups, and not just within the group, or maybe start processing within the group of inheritors of the British legacy, and then go into the two. So let's talk about that. How do you think that would work and roll out?
Yeah, I think that that sort of clarifies what I was thinking about, and I hadn't quite put that together, but yes, what that you're saying makes a lot of sense there. I'm going to mute again because there's a dog in the background that keeps making a lot of noise. But and I'll have to leave in a few minutes, but this is a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Moira.
It comes to mind, I'm working with the project of sexual assault at Tilburg, and kind of pulling it all together now. But it occurs to me that when you're talking about inheritors, and I think I just lost the thought I had. I apologize. It's 61-year-old brain here. But it occurs to me that what's passed down by the secret that's kept, I mean, it could, whether it applies to a personal condition or a community condition where it's so prevalent among young women and men now, and unspoken because there are taboos, but because we're not addressing it, because we're not giving them space, because it's a huge secret associated with shame and blame and who's going to be guilty, the guilty party, that inherited memory being passed down. I found by reading the book that that's probably something that affected my grandparents and my parents and my daughter, and it's unspoken, and when it is spoken about, it's very, it just passes down. So that's why your book and your work was so meaningful to me because it just shocked the hell out of me to hear that, oh my God, this is it's a memory that maybe I passed down to my daughter, maybe I passed down, and do we want to stop passing it down? So I guess that's community level. It's my own circle community. And then it was in all the women that I worked with at the university and all the men that I worked with at the university who, it took forever for them to admit that that was what had happened. I don't know why I'm talking about this right now. I lost the point I wanted to make, but thank you anyway.
I'm understanding what you're saying.
The perpetrator, the quote unquote, the person who's perpetrating or the aggressor, it also is going to carry that.
Absolutely.
And the memory that you're talking about, whether it be in, I think the Nuremberg trials were something that we're basing some of what we know about working with people who have been assaulted. It does help for them to go back and be prepared to talk with the person who did it. And it's passed down. Assault is passed down. So
I'm convinced that this white supremacists that we see are rising all over the world and are people who have not really dealt with their own history. I wouldn't be surprised at all if their families were racists. And of course, we know that what you learn in the family, but it could even skip a generation. It could be previous generations that they've inherited that hatred and that violence. Even back to Vegas, I was not at all surprised. Everybody's going around saying, "Well, why did he do it? Why did he do it?" And then you hear about his father being this pathological criminal. Of course. It might sound like simplistic, but it's not. What we carry deep in our brains and emotions and tissues. It's and so we really are back to dialogue, and I like that point about a whole community could be traumatized. And of course, and I just realized that too. The indigenous community as a community is traumatized. So not only are we dealing with individual traumatization from residential schools, but the whole community. And of course, they have had 8 generations of trauma. So processing, people are saying, well, come on, what's taking so long for them to get over it? It will take many generations to get over it. A lot of work.
Okay.
Pamela, you put in the notes. Can I pick on you, Pamela? You wrote in your notes that once you heard other people feel like you felt that you could be more open. Can you talk about that?
Okay, so I'm muted now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a long process over a lot of time, that connecting with other people and hearing their stories and realizing that I wasn't the only one that had a difficult childhood or whatever it was that went on. And it helped me to feel closer, because I felt like an outcast as a child for most of my school time. And so understanding that everybody had issues of one sort or another just helped me to feel closer to people and to, I guess, to become a more sociable person. And then, of course, I guess the end of it is, in a sense, the current state of it is, connecting with you and realizing all that you've written about in terms of generational trauma. So for me, it's been a process of many decades, slowly unfolding, and kind of the current state is what you talk about. So we're all in the same boat together. we
I'm
all
wondering, would the process not have taken so long if you'd been able to share with other people in a dialogical or any other format. You know, I mean, friends coming together talking is wonderful as well.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I guess moments that were very helpful for me was being in workshops where they facilitated true dialogue, or else the facilitator simply had that bigger understanding that the value of personal stories brings, i.e. the personal mistakes that we've all made. Yeah, some of those moments have been very helpful for me. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There was somebody else, I think, that wanted to say something.
Gita, do you want to stop your screen share? Do you have more slides you want to show?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. So then we can continue with everybody on visually.
Okay. How do I stop share? Right.
I have a question, but I don't know if it's relevant to ask it now. So shall I just ask it, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I ordered the book last week, but I only got it a few hours ago. So I might ask a question that I will find the answer later on. But I come from a context where I've been working with refugees in a reception center in Belgium for the last 10 years. And obviously living in Belgium, I was aware of the two world wars that we've been through as a country. And but it was only a few months ago that I heard about my great-grandmother, who was actually a refugee in the First World War. And so to me, that was really interesting to see how my personal history of working in a refugee center and my family history were kind of coming together. But I'm really left with a lot of gaps, as you were talking about in the introduction as well. And I'm wondering how you actually see the work of processing through generational trauma if there are many gaps and no one can offer any information about those gaps.
Yeah, that's been my trial, because I have this inherited memory of how my father's two children were killed. They were under 5, 4, and 3. It was historical research. I wrote to archives in Germany and in Poland. I got no information on them, but I had this memory in my back that they were shot in the back. All my friends know about this. And I've had it since I was 4. And I didn't look at it. I was told, and then when I was older and when I was working on my dissertation, I was told, go to the paranormal. And I didn't want to go to the paranormal. To me, it was real. It was my acupuncturist who validated me. I told him, don't do any needles on my back. I've got this sensitive spot. And I told him about it. And he said, yeah, brothers and sisters are closer than we realize. We are connected to our past legacies in ways we don't know. And sometimes we'll never know the answers. But when I did the historical research, I discovered that that they were from Krakow, and that one of the first ghettos ever built was Krakow, which shocked me. Every time I hear anything shocks me. And children under 5 were killed immediately, and the gas chambers were not yet built, so they were shot. It was common to shoot them. There were no gas chambers, so I was, it didn't completely close the gap to my puzzle. But what helped appease me was I had a way to memorialize them by, I had never thought of it. I put their names on my father's tombstone. Without it, I had no birth date, I had no death date, which made me cry. But at least I could do that. So it gave me a little bit of closure to that gap. The book itself is the tool for processing. So every chapter has questions at the end of it. And I'm hoping that, and you can certainly come up with your own as you go through it, it'll make you think of other things. But as you go through it, the questions are based on the concepts in that chapter. But if you go through that, answering those questions throughout the book, by the time you finish the book, you will have either written your story or processed it to quite a considerable extent. So I hope the book helps you to do that process.
Mhm.
Even your name, I think it's the second chapter where one of the questions is, what's your name? How did you get your name? What meaning does it have? Something we don't normally think about, but then when you ask that question, and you find that there's a whole story often behind just your name.
Yeah, but that's the interesting part also when you're working with refugees. I once worked with a young man who was abducted when he was 3 years old, and he was enslaved and trafficked, and he didn't even know his real name. He was given a name, and he was completely lost because he didn't even know his name. So I'm really interested in your approach, and I'll be looking forward to reading your book about how you present a way of processing from a social constructionist point of view, because I've been trained as a clinical psychologist, where obviously were a lot of the classical paradigms where I feel that we're missing out on stuff. But it's interesting to think about how we can process things with very little information, or with other forms of information that people get.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And sometimes we think we don't have the information or the memory. I have a chapter on inherited memory. We don't pay attention to it, and it's there. And people will say, I have this thing. Do you think that's possible? And yeah. Mm-hmm. So we actually sometimes do know what we don't know, and we don't know that we know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. Thank you.
It's fascinating, Gita, that you mentioned names, the powers, because I'm just wondering, and this may seem personal, but how your parents managed, or what led your parents to give you your middle name?
That's my name. Baack was my husband's.
But Arian.
Arian was my name. And
really?
I always was so embarrassed by having the name Arian as a Jew. But I found a book of names in Israel, and in Krakow, where my father was from, it was a bona fide Jewish name. I think Hitler got it wrong. I think the Aryans are not necessarily the German race.
Y'all come from Krakow, yeah.
A lot of ironies we live in.
Oh,
and in the Polish spelling, it's Arjan, Aryan, which could easily be Aryan. It's pronounced there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Gita, I hate to close us off here, but we're at our time, and I know people are probably needing to move on to other parts of their day. Do you want to close by asking everyone to just say maybe one word of how they're feeling right now, and then we can close?
Yes, I'm wondering, there's a lot of chat. Is there any, are those going to go onto the after conversation?
I can save the chat and put it in the online dialogue space. I do invite everybody to go there. I've posted Joanne's questions that she sent in earlier today. So feel free to continue the conversation there. And I did put the link in the chat. I will send the recording. Actually, I'll put the recording on that page also. So if you want to refer back to the recording, I will also put Gita's slides on that page so you can get to her slides. And just really invite everybody to continue in that space. And I'm sure Gita will feel,
And I'll try to answer some of the questions on the chat in that space then too. And if anybody wants to write to me privately, that's good too.
So Gita, this is June. When we met these many years ago, and I knew you were writing that book, I just couldn't wait for it to be published. And now I'm happy that it's in my hot little hands. And thank you for writing it. Look forward to just gaining more of your wisdom. Thanks very much.
we'll share wisdoms. Thank you.
Anybody else want to do a closing comment?
Yes. Grateful is the one word I would choose, but not just to Gita, who for this whole conversation, which is very unfulfilling because I want to keep talking. But to you, Dawn, again, as the support that you're giving to make these things happen. Thank you.
Yes.
You're
Gita,
welcome.
thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Yeah, a big thank you from Down Under as well. It was the first time I was part of a conversation like that. I enjoyed it really a lot, and I'll be looking forward to reading more and maybe participating online as well. Dawn, do you know how long the conversation, like, is a page gonna go on as long as conversations are there?
It's there until
Okay.
the website closes down. So
Okay.
as long as people continue the conversation, you can follow the conversation so you'll know in your inbox if somebody makes a comment.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna go off to sleep. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Bye.
Bye. Well, thank you, everybody, so much. It really was a wonderful conversation. And, we have two roles to play as relational hosts and as processing our own story. So we're all, that's a lifelong piece of work that we do, and let's just enjoy it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gita, and thank you everyone for joining the call today.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.